see that our next guest has arrived, and I would like to ask our team to promote her to the host. And I have a pleasure to introduce to everyone Sonja Lyubomirsky. Sonja is a Ph.D. and distinguished professor of psychology at University of California and Riverside. She graduated with summa cum laude Harvard University and did her Ph.D. in social personality psychology from Stanford University. So Sonja is one of us a little bit. We are one of them in this. Sonja currently teaches courses in social psychology and positive psychology and serves as a Department of Psychology's vice chair. Sonja wrote a couple of very interesting books, and the one that I have here, I don't know, of course, my screen doesn't show it. The most recommended by our professors, The House of Happiness, which is so important right now. And with that, I would like to introduce Sonja. Sonja, are you there?
Hi, everyone. Everyone can hear me and see me?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's lovely to be here. I'm really excited to talk about happiness today.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Sonja. It's really a big pleasure to have you. And this session, just for everyone, this session we will carry on as a session where you ask questions to Sonja. And on purpose, we did not send in upfront any questions. So Sonja will take any questions you have. So think about the questions you would like to ask her. Our expert of happiness. I can start with one question just to start the discussion, which really ponders my mind a lot. So it's hard to check out with what's going on right now in the world, Sonja, and the war in Ukraine, pandemic, the shakes in economy, jobs. I'm just wondering, what is your first aid kit of happiness when things go so bad? What is your first aid kit?
Yeah, it's so funny because that's the exact same term that someone recently used to ask me too about the first aid kit. I gave a kind of a talk in Poland actually, and of course a lot happening in Poland right now with helping of Ukrainian refugees, and so they're wondering about, how can you be happy in these troubling times? And that's a question that I guess we've been asking ourselves for a long time. Positive psychology, which is my field, which is basically the field of studying kind of what is good about life. I call my area of research well-being science, sort of the science of happiness, the science of well-being. And it started actually right before 9/11. And so so we sort of started this new field where we decided, it's just as important to focus on sort of virtue and character, strength and well-being as it is to focus on depression and stress and trauma. It's important to study both of those things. And then 9/11 happened and we had this whole crisis, like, is this even relevant, what we're doing, during that time? And of course, now there's kinds of lots of horrible things happening in the world, and also in people's individuals' lives too. We all experience adversity and tragedies in our lives at some point. And so I guess the question was like, is it even relevant? Like, should we care about happiness during troubling times? And the answer was actually kind of a resounding yes. That focusing on your well-being, the well-being of your children, your colleagues, your people you work with, your neighbors, right? It's very important, because research shows that happier people are more likely to persevere. They're more creative. They have a stronger physical health. They have better relationships. They're better negotiators. They're better leaders, right? So happiness is not just something that feels good. It's not just about pleasure. It has really positive consequences, for other people, not just for yourself, but people around you, right? If you're a happier person, your family is going to do better, right? Your relationships will be better. Your workplace is going to be more productive. You're gonna have more energy to help others, right, when you're happier. So I guess that's sort of one of my answers to that question. And we can talk more about sort of how you can become happier. There's lots of strategies. My book, The How of Happiness, basically summarized it in terms of 12 strategies. And really, there are hundreds of strategies to become happier. But there's some that scientists have been focusing on. So they include expressing gratitude for what you have. So we all have bad things in our lives, but we also have lots of good things too. Sort of focusing on what we have and being grateful for that also makes us want to sort of do better, inspires us, makes us want to help others. Helping others, actually, kindness is a happiness strategy, which seems weird, right? Because we help others not because it makes us feel good mostly, but because we think it's important to help, right? But it turns out that being the giver, helping is actually even more kind of impactful for the giver than it is for the receiver, depending on what the helping is. And then, lots of other things. Physical exercise is important. Meditation works for many people. Having goals to pursue makes people happy. Focusing on relationships. One of my recently I've been most focused on studying what makes us connect with others. Connection, relationships, you could argue, are kind of maybe the most important factor in happiness. I mean, it's hard to sort of say what's the most important, but I think connection is way up there. And so my latest research is about how do we foster connection, whether it's between us and one other person, or a group of people, or organization, or a family, or even God, or a pet. You can connect with in lots of different ways. So anyway, so I can go on and on about that. So I'm curious what you all sort of want to hear more about specifically.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So summarizing that, the taking care of our own happiness is not just nice to have, but it's like a must-have, a hygiene factor, something that is necessary to be better people for others. We have a question from Vishal saying, Sonja, would you have a comment on initiatives like inner engineering, working on self to be happy?
I haven't heard that term inner engineering, although I can guess what it means. Yes, well, I actually absolutely agree with that concept, that lots of research shows that happiness is something that's inside of us. It's not really outside of us. And what I mean by that is when you think about sort of throughout history, the way that common people, but also sort of great like religious thinkers, wisdom traditions, have been thinking about happiness is that it's something, it's due to luck or fortune, right? That happy people are just those who are luckier, right? They happen to have better, they happen to have better health. They're just lucky. They happen to be born into a family that is more comfortable, has more money, or they're born in a country that just happens to be, has more fortune. But when once you have your basic needs met, so we're not talking about someone who's a refugee right now, or someone who's in an abusive relationship where they're not going to be happy right now. But once you're sort of, I guess maybe people on this Zoom call, most of you probably are relatively comfortable. You're not going through some major tragedy. If you're relatively comfortable in your life, then what really matters for happiness is what's inside of you, that sort of inner engineering. It's sort of how you think about yourself, how you think about the world, how you choose to behave, every single day. That matters more to happiness than your sort of external circumstances. Again, with the big caveat, this is as long as your external circumstances are sort of okay, or, medium or good. If they're bad, if you live in poverty, then those circumstances are going to make you really unhappy. So I'm talking about people who are sort of relatively comfortable and things are okay in their lives. Then it's the inner engineering that works.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. The next question comes from Amit, and he said, he asked for comment. As a part of my journey of growth, I was trying to identify what are the core motivations for decisions. And I noted that in my learned sources lean towards fear and hunger. They feel negative. Your thoughts, please.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'm reading Amit's comment right now. Motivations for decisions are fear and hunger. Okay, I'm not really sure what that means. Can Amit talk? Maybe he can.
Yeah, so I was trying to get to the core of what, motivates or drives people to make certain decisions, right? As, just when I was doing my own self-reflection. And a lot of learned sources talk about most decisions being motivated by hunger or fear or a combination of both, right? When you break it down to its, almost what it is. And they felt negative to me. I was like, it couldn't be just those two, right? So
yeah, but I'm sorry, is this like a philosophy or is this just people talking?
It's there in Hindu texts.
Oh, okay.
It's there in, what you learn from, religion, spirituality, and all of that. It kind of boils down in some cases to this. So one of the perspectives that I was looking at, I was like, this can't be it. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. Thank you. Okay. I think I understand the question. Well, certainly some of our decisions come from kind of, I guess what you call like a negative motivation, right? Like, or when, right. Well, I'm just trying to understand, like you have decisions, daily decisions, or like decisions about your life. Like, should I get married? I mean, I'm okay. Let me just sort of talk about, I guess, what the science says. So I think certainly you can have a more positive perspective, and a lot of decisions can come from sort of a positive origin, right? So there's a lot of research on goal pursuit and how pursuing meaningful, important life goals, is associated with happiness, right? So happy people tend to have projects and goals and sort of things that they want to pursue, visions for their future. And that certainly it can come from sort of a negative motivation. Like I don't want to be alone. And so I'm going to try to find someone, partner. Right. But it's people are happier. Those goals come from a more kind of positive motivation, right? Which is that, I want to be happy. I want to lead a flourishing life. I want to contribute to society. I want to grow as a person. I want to connect with others. So those are sort of positive motivations, and those are associated with happiness. And in fact, there's a theory in psychology called self-determination theory, which is one of my favorite theories. And it talks about those three sort of primary human needs or primary motivations. And I'll sort of say them again. So one is the kind of the need or motivation for personal growth. So basically any kind of goal where you can learn something, challenge yourself, grow as a person is associated with happiness. So personal growth is one. The second is connecting with others. I already mentioned that importance of relationships, establishing, strengthening, maintaining our relationships. And the third is contributing to society. So anything we can do to help other people, our neighbors, our country, people in need. And so those are kind of, I guess I would call them kind of positive motivations that are associated with happiness that I think, that research suggests that we should focus on those kind of positive motivations.
Could I add perspective on this?
Thank you.
In my personal, I call this like I've bad fuel versus good fuel, or unleaded versus super unleaded. So like the bad fuel was like the pursuit of money, the pursuit of material things. And then that gets you so far, or got me so far. And then you just kind of like, is this it? Is this, I don't know. Is this it? And then you're like, there's got to be something else. And that's how like Life of Consequence kind of like it's one of the courses we took. Kind of
thank you. Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I have another Anna mentioned my book, The How of Happiness. I have another book called The Myths of Happiness, which is exactly on this topic, right? So it's on this idea that we have this idea that, I'll be happy when or if these things happen. Like I'll be happy when I make money, or I'll be happy when I move to that city I've always wanted to live in. I'll be happy when I get that job I've always wanted. And there's literally a chapter in the book that's called something like, I've made it, now what, right? So now I've gotten those things. And then I realized actually I'm still not happy. And that's partly where the conclusion comes that happiness is really something within, it's inside of us, not really outside of us. It doesn't lie in those achievements. It lies in something inside of us. And those are called extrinsic goals. So extrinsic goals are goals to make money, to have more power, fame, beauty, right? Sort of power, fame, beauty, money, wealth are called extrinsic goals. Now, they're not necessarily bad. Like we're not saying that we should never pursue those things. And money is actually a whole other topic that we can talk about, because money does make us happier, because it allows us to do a lot of things. It allows us to grow as a person. It allows us to help others, right? It allows us to connect with others. So it really matters how you spend your money, not having it, but how you spend it. And so anyway, those are called extrinsic goals, and those are not really associated with happiness. And it's the intrinsic goals that are associated with happiness. And those are the ones that I just mentioned: goals for personal growth, helping others, connecting with others. So yeah, anyway, absolutely. I have lots of thoughts about sort of what happens when you've achieved those goals that you think are going to make you happy, and then you realize, no, actually, I'm still not happy. And people who are actually very successful have this problem, right? Because once you're sort of at the pinnacle of your career or whatever, you've achieved the thing that you've been working for a long time, then you feel this empty. A lot of people sort of report kind of an emptiness after that. So that's what happens when you're too focused on sort of the extrinsic goals.
Thank you, Sonja. The next question comes from Ayan. Ayan, if you can speak, that would be great.
Yes. So it's basically like I have someone close who's been sick like for a long time and very much in pain due to different issues for the last 2 years. So I was wondering that like how this person, or how can I motivate, or someone can motivate this person of happiness, or how she can use happiness to get to a better state of her mind.
Okay, thank you, Ayan. So you're talking about someone who's in a lot of pain and is not happy. So, okay, so this is an important subject to discuss, and I'm just going to make it general, not just about. Obviously, I don't know the person you're talking about, but let's talk about people who have depression, like sort of clinical levels of depression, anxiety, or like trauma. How can they be happy? And what scientists have concluded is that, of course, professional help usually is needed in those cases. Ideally, that person can get professional mental health help from, and it could be from talk therapy, and it could be from pharmacotherapy, drug treatment. But usually, the professional help gets you from, let's say they're kind of let's say your goal is to be like a 10 on a 10-point scale. And when you're in pain and when you're depressed or whatever's happening, you're below a 0, right? You're like -5, -7. And people who are -5, they don't want to go from -5 to 0. They want to go from -5 to +5, right? Or +10. And so often the immediate professional help can get you out of that immediate sort of crisis from maybe a -5 to a 0, or -5 to a 2. But then the happiness strategies that I've been talking about, like gratitude, exercise, trying to be more optimistic, meditating, those can help you, focusing on relationships, those can help you sort of get from like the 0 higher, right? So I guess kind of like, I would say it's sort of a 2-step process. One is to get out of that crisis and into sort of feeling more neutral, sort of not in pain, not depressed. And that really requires professional therapy. And I'm not a clinician, right? I'm not a therapist. I'm a researcher. But then after you're in that sort of more neutral territory, then you might have sort of some resources and some bandwidth to sort of try to focus on positive things, try to be more positive about your life, focusing on other people. I mean, it might seem counterintuitive that someone who's having their own troubles might want to focus on other people and to helping others, but it actually turns out that when we, almost anything that we can do to focus our attention away from ourselves and onto other people or onto other things, maybe hobbies or work, can relieve some of those negative emotions can actually make us happier, because a lot of life's problems have to do with sort of too much self-focus, too much sort of self-absorption. Now, when you're depressed, self-focus is adaptive because it kind of is helping you. It's sort of a signal. It tells you like there's something wrong, right? You need to kind of focus on yourself. But then to get out of that, you really need to sort of try to focus on something outside of yourself.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Yogesh. Yogesh?
Yeah, I was just trying to ask, how can one be happy when they're refugees? They're dependent on so many people. But, I think we need happiness for well-being. If we are unhappy, then we harm ourselves. But, when we are dependent for everything on everybody else, what do you recommend from studies that can help?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is kind of what I was saying about how a lot of what I'm talking about really applies to people who are kind of in a comfortable zone, right? They're not a refugee, completely dependent, like where their life is completely uncertain. They don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, where they're going to live, where their food is going to come from. So that is, I guess I would say it's very, very difficult to be happy in that circumstance. Maybe not impossible, but very, very, very difficult. Hopefully that circumstance won't last forever. There's sort of three basic needs that people have that they need to satisfy to be happy. One of them is the need for connection. Again, I already talked about connecting with others. So even if you're a refugee, dependent on others, you might get happiness from being with your children, from connecting with making new friends, for connecting with others. Another is a need for competence or mastery, right? We have this need to sort of be good at something, right? And so again, even if you're dependent on others, maybe you can still work on something, you can build something that makes you feel good. But the third one, and that's the one I think you're asking about, is the need for autonomy or control, right? We all have, as human beings, we have a need to sort of have control of our lives, right? To have some control of our lives. Of course, none of us have control over everything or over every minute of our days, but to have sort of some sense of autonomy. And so if you're completely dependent on others and you have sort of basically no control over like what happens to you over the course of your day or week or month or year, then it's very hard, if not impossible, to be truly happy.
Thank you. We have a Doug jumping in with some example.
Yeah, no, thank you. Just hearing what you're saying, I think it's make all this sense to me. The example I would like to bring is from Brazil, especially here, the carnival, right? Because carnival people just expect about the party, right? The people on the street dancing, etc., right? Even for me from São Paulo, I always saw the carnival in Rio de Janeiro kind of strange to me because I never understand well why people spend a lot of time in the carnival, etc. But I have the opportunity to talk to the people who organize the carnival in Brazil. And interesting that 70% of people who participate in the carnival, organizing the carnival, is from poor neighborhoods, right? The people who live in the slums. They live in a very dangerous place, right? They have traffic dealers and the police all the time fighting there, right? And at the same time, they spend their entire lives just to put the carnival together, right? And there's a kind of, and they feel happy. If you talk to them, they know they're in a very poor house. They know they have in a very challenging situation, right? They need to climb the mountain to have a house, like sometimes 2,000 meters from the ocean there, and these people still happy, right? I think it's one of the major things that they have the carnival is their life, right? It's a big objective for them to put the carnival together. They will have at least 1 hour. They will be in the spotlight. Everything's happening there. The TV cameras is there. The TV, all the channels is covering the carnival. At least for 1 hour is like a parade for each school's stay. I think the people feel happy just because this 1 hour and they had the opportunity to organize the carnival over and over. These people dedicate their entire lives to the carnival, and they still happy. And to be honest, some of them face a very similar situation of what happened to Ukraine, because the wars between the police and the traffic dealers is horrible sometimes. So they meet of this firing all the time, and the people really feel happy about their lives. So that's for me is an example that took me a while to understand, and once I know more about that. That's why I'd like to bring the carnival thing. It's more about how the people who's organized, the poor people is involved on that, and how they feel about it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's really fascinating to hear. When you first mentioned carnival, I mean, I was thinking about connection, right? It's a way to you're connecting with others, you're with your family, with your friends, and yeah, like you're having fun. I mean, it looks like it's just fun, but fun is not just about positive emotion. I mean, it's about, yeah, why are you having fun? Because you're connecting, because you say it's a break, it's a distraction from like the difficulties of your life. And so I think those things can be wonderful. And as long as they're not, harmful, right? So you can imagine like people do drugs or do dangerous things, because as a distraction, right, from their daily life. And so, or overeat, maybe you eat too much or you drink too much, right? Because you're trying to distract. So as long as you don't overdo that. And so these kinds of festivals or holidays, they're actually are really well managed because it's a very constrained set of time, right? It's not every day, it's only in February that it happens, or March, or so because it's constrained in time, it kind of it doesn't get out of hand, right? Because it was happening all the time, then maybe you would not be able to get your work done, right? Because or care for your children, right? Because you're having fun partying. So anyway, I absolutely agree with you that people need kind of a break and a distraction and connecting with others and sort of learning new things. So it's a great example. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So now coming from the distraction and connection in this form, let's move to next questions related with happiness and age. Deepti.
Hey, thanks, Anna. Hi, Sonja. Thank you so much for sharing these thoughts and research. It's such a powerful and important topic to talk about. I've been actually curious about a thing which makes me just think that maybe does happiness change with age, or the factors driving happiness, they really change as we get older?
Thank you, Deepti. Yeah, it's a really great question. So there's lots of like sort of myths about this, right? So first of all, people think that that older, like no one wants to get old, right? Because for lots of reasons, because we think we'll be unhappy, when we're older. But it turns out actually that older people are happier. So the happiest age group is probably in their 60s, even maybe into 70s. So that's something to look forward to. The least happy age group are like 14 to 28, right? So teenagers and young people in their 20s. Now, that's not surprising. That's when you sort of think like, oh, I'd like to be 25. No, you don't want to be 25, right? And we kind of remember what it's like to be 25, where, maybe you're sort of still forming your identity. Maybe you haven't found your life partner yet. You don't know what you're going to do with your career in terms of your life. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and people sort of are still kind of insecure finding themselves. And so generally people get happier as they age. Now, some data shows that there's a dip in happiness in midlife. Now, there's some controversy about that, because some of the data, you find that when you sort of control for other things. And so, because in midlife, what is happening? People tend to be, maybe not at the top of their careers, but they're kind of like really working their way up. They have families that they're taking care of. Families, maybe they're that sandwich generation where they're taking care of both their children and their parents. And so a lot is happening during that time. And so that may or may not be associated with sort of a dip in happiness. So some studies show kind of a U shape in happiness where there's sort of a dip around 45, 50, but then people get happier after that. So I guess the good news is that people get happier as they age. And what's interesting is sort of what is happening when you're older. And, you could imagine, well, people are sort of more confident and kind of secure. They have sort of their basic needs met. But it turns out that older people are also just sort of more positive. They're more focused on sort of positive things, the negative things. There may even be some age-related brain changes that are associated with sort of focus on positivity. And they kind of cope better with things. It's like if you've gone through a lot in your life, you don't freak out about little things anymore, right? You know you're going to make it through the day. In fact, one of my examples is when I work with students, sometimes things happen, in the research process, and they kind of freak out about little things. They're just like, oh my God, this is happening, and I'm like, it's okay, right? It'll be okay. You'll get through this. And so there's kind of more stress, I guess, when you're younger. I mean, or when you're much older, when you're, and you're into your 60s, 70s, people just kind of know like how to handle stress better. And also they spend their time differently, which is sort of interesting. Research shows that when you ask young people and older people, like if you could have dinner with anyone you wanted, like you could have dinner with like a famous author or like your best friend, who would it be? Younger people choose the famous author. And the idea then there is when you're younger, you're kind of like you're making new connections, you're sort of discovering yourself, you take more risks. And when you're older, you kind of know what you like, know what makes you happy. So you're more likely to sort of choose to spend time with your sister or your best friend than with someone who you don't know. So they tend to kind of narrow their social connection to the people that they really love and they know will make them happy. Whereas younger people are taking more risks. So they're more often, some of those risks mean that they're going to be unhappy some of the time. So anyway, really, really interesting question about happiness.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I better understand this happiness Mariana Trench between my 14-year-old son and me. And the good news is that I can be only happier. So let's move to the different dimension of happiness that I think touches a little bit more about the hedonistic adaptation and from age, happiness changing with age. Now let's say let's go to the happiness changing when we achieve next states. Alpna, please.
Yeah. Hi. So the idea is, it seems to me like basis the discussion here, happiness seems to be like a journey. Once you reach one state of happiness, then as human tendency, we strive for the next state. You know, I mean, any thoughts from your end? Is that something that you have seen, and how do we perceive that?
Thank you so much. That's a great, I guess, way of describing it. Well, there's something that sort of Anna mentioned called the hedonic treadmill or hedonic adaptation. And what it means, I want to speak to that because I think that speaks to your question. So what it is that when, as human beings, we strive for things, right? We have goals. And then as we achieve each goal, we tend to sort of, first we're happy. Let's say we I don't know, get a job that we really wanted, and now we have this job and we're really happy about it. Or even we get married or we have a baby and that's something that we really, really wanted. So first it makes us really happy, but then that happiness kind of boost doesn't last forever, right? It's temporary. And lots of research shows this, that happiness boosts from like getting more money. We get a raise in salary. Finally, we make the money that we want to make, and then we get used to it, right? We start getting used to it. We adapt to that new level of income, and then we start taking it for granted. And that's called hedonic adaptation or hedonic treadmill. And that's partly, I guess, kind of like where that journey comes from, where you sort of, you achieve one thing and then you're happy, but then you adapt and you start sort of taking for granted that you already have it. Now you have a new goal and now you want to achieve even more or something different, something greater. And so you keep doing that, you keep adapting. So one question is like, is that a good or bad thing? And, evolutionary theory would suggest that this is natural, right? This is what humans do. We make progress, but then we're sort of never quite satisfied. Then we go to the next stage, to the next level. And so you could argue that it's adaptive. The hedonic treadmill or the hedonic adaptation is adaptive, because if we achieved a goal and we were really happy about that, and then we stayed really, really happy about that, we never adapted, then we would never want to achieve the next goal, right? We would just sort of be satisfied with sort of that first goal. And so for us to kind of make progress, to keep making advances, we have this sort of something inside of us, kind of wired inside of us, which is that we're never really quite satisfied with everything that we achieve. But it has this cost, which is happiness, right? That we're sort of constantly sort of striving for more. We're never like sort of completely satisfied for very long, right?
Yeah. No, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. We have another very interesting question coming from Prithvi, and which is related, helping other people to be that are unhappy. And I would add, how can we do it and without getting into trap of being codependent? Prithvi, let's go ahead. Prithvi? Okay, so the question was
Yeah.
here. I can read it. So, seeking happiness, isn't this something you need to do yourself? When I'm not in the person's shoes who is unhappy, how can I help?
Right. Actually, there's some really relevant science here that I'd love to mention about how to help others, because there's two kinds of help, and one is called visible support or visible help, and the other is called invisible support or invisible help. And it turns out that visible support is not as it's sort of not as helpful. And what I mean by that is that think about your sort of, let's say you have, some of us have elderly parents. And so we're visiting our elderly parents and we want to help them. But if we do it too kind of visibly, too kind of saliently, if we say, oh, mom, dad, let me get that for you, let me go get groceries for you. You do it in a way that actually makes them feel worse about themselves, right? It makes you can help someone that makes them feel like they're weak or ineffectual themselves. So that can actually backfire. That can make them actually feel worse. But invisible support is a way of helping that doesn't really highlight that person's need so much, right? So maybe you come over, you're like, oh, I was just in the neighborhood. Oh, I just happened to pick up a few things that we could all share to eat together tonight, right? And so you're helping, but you're not kind of making it sort of so clear, like, oh, you really need help from me. And so that's kind of one way that really is a positive way to help. Again, calling invisible support as opposed to visible support. Yeah, and so because again, you want, and you mentioned codependency. I mean, you want the person to sort of be able to help themselves, right? So that's kind of an altruism, right? Sort of, how do you help someone help themselves? Like, so they're not dependent on you, right? So that they're able to then like learn skills or strategies that they can to help themselves. But there are situations like someone is sick, they need to help getting to the doctor, and so you can help them, but again, without making them feel bad about themselves.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's another question from Deepti, and it's a great question, Deepti. Go ahead.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity again. Yeah, the question was, I was just curious. I had heard on a podcast once that the happiness is also related to our genetics, and our genes play a role in how positive or negative we feel about life events in general. Any thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great question. Well, here's the thing: genetics have to do with every single human trait, right? So whether it's happiness, whether it's blood pressure or depression, or even our preferences for music, have a genetic component as well. Like how much we weigh has a genetic component. So lots and lots of things have genetic influences on them, including happiness. So research shows that that about 50% of individual differences in happiness are accounted for by genetic influences. Now, here's what that means. There's how many people are here? There's 100. Actually, this is perfect. There's about 100 people in this Zoom room. There's 100 people. So all of us here differ in our happiness levels, right? Some people in this room on the screen are really, really happy. Others are really unhappy. Many are sort of in between. Now, if I had a magic wand and I changed everyone here into a genetic clone of each other, like we were all genetic clones, like we were all twins, identical twins, we would still differ in how happy we are. So even if we all shared the same DNA, we would still differ in how happy we are. So still some people would be happy, others would be unhappy, but those differences would be reduced by 50%. So that's what genetic mean. That's what the genetic influences mean, that they are responsible for some of the differences between us. Okay, so it doesn't mean that we're fated if just because of genetic influences and happiness doesn't mean that we're sort of fated to be really happy or really unhappy. The one way to think about it, it's kind of like a set range, is that if I am sort of lucky to be born with kind of a natural tendency to be happy, my set range is sort of here. So let's say it's between a 6 and a 10. For someone else, their set range might be between a 2 and a 6. So it just means that if my set range is in the higher range, it's just easier for me to be happy, right? I don't have to work as hard at it. It might come naturally to me. But if your set range is lower, you have to work harder at it, right? You have to actually put more time and energy into it. And maybe, I don't really want to say this because it's sort of an extreme, strong things to say. Maybe no matter how much effort I put in, I'll never really be a 10, really, really high if my set range is low. I'm not sure if that's true. I think with enough effort, you might actually kind of break out of that range. But yeah, basically it just means that we have to sort of work harder to be happier if our set range is lower. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just to follow on question, would you say that we know already that our genes are making us more happy or not? Like, can we figure that out? Or
Well,
not?
well, you probably know. Okay, so you everyone listening to right now, you probably have a sense of how naturally happy you are. I would be surprised if you didn't, right? And what I mean by that is like, even when things are, not so good, right? Are you sort of someone who kind of is pretty good at coping, pretty resilient, gets back to your kind of, it's like what's your baseline? And so one thing you could do is there's lots of happiness measures out there, and you could Google it, or you can Google my name and find, I have a scale of happiness called the subjective happiness scale. And you could sort of take that measure. It takes you just a few seconds. And you can sort of take it maybe once a month for a few months or for a year, and then get kind of an average of that. And I would say that's your happiness baseline. I mean, unless you're going through some really, really, either a really amazing time or a really bad time right now. So then your measures of happiness are going to be kind of slightly depressed, if you're going through a bad time right now. But anyway, the idea is that we all kind of have a sense probably already what our baseline is. And so if we have a high happiness baseline, even when bad things happen, yes, we're going to be unhappy. So people, by the way, who are naturally happy, they're not happy all the time. But they kind of tend to sort of bounce back, and sort of their baseline is going to be higher. But people who are kind of on the low side, even when good things happen, they're still kind of not super happy. So you probably know.
Thank you. Let's talk about shortly about the happiness worm, jealousy, envy. Emmanuel, your question.
Yeah, it just in the past, maybe even sometimes, just envy is just kind of like crops up. And any tips, strategies, or things along those lines? I'm assuming people struggle with this, or at least I do.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So we're talking about the role of sort of envy and happiness. Yeah, has a big role. So let's talk about that. So in fact, when I went to Stanford, I got my Ph.D. at Stanford, and my dissertation was on social comparison, and that is how we compare ourselves to others and how that affects our happiness. And what I found, which is probably not going to be a surprise to anyone here, is that people who are happier we all compare ourselves to others. We can't help it, right? We can't help to see that other people might be more attractive than us, or make more money than us, right? Or less. But happier people sort of don't pay as much attention to social comparisons as people who are, happier people don't pay as much attention than people who are less happy. So yes, they see it, but it just doesn't affect their happiness as much. So just the fact that my neighbors have houses that are much bigger than mine, and that actually is true. I'm looking outside, and there's like some really lovely new homes. I don't really care that much. I mean, I'm like, oh, that's a nice house. Yeah, like if someone gave me that house for free, I would be happy. I would move in, but it doesn't really affect my happiness. But some people really have their social comparisons really affect them. I should say upward social comparisons. And that's where envy comes in. So envy basically is when you want something that someone else has. And it's kind of like the opposite. It's one of the ways I guess you could think is the opposite to gratitude, right? Because when you're grateful for what you have, and you're not focusing on what other people have, right? So this is partly why gratitude is a really important strategy for happiness. And I would say a really important antidote to envy, right? It's gratitude. But it's really hard to cultivate. It's really hard to practice because it's not easy. You don't just sit there and be like, oh, I'm grateful. I'm really grateful. You really have to try to feel it in a genuine, sincere way. So yeah, envy definitely interferes with happiness. And interestingly, I was just reading some articles showing about the role of envy in friendship. And it turns out that, again, maybe you won't be surprised to learn this, envy is really toxic in friendship, right? It can really harm or even destroy our friendships when we are envious of others. When our friends, let's say, we've all probably had this experience when we're friends with someone for a long time and suddenly maybe they suddenly become much more successful than us, or they have a wonderful family life that we don't have, and we are envious of that. And that can really harm our friendships if we focus too much on that envy, as opposed to focusing on ourselves and how grateful we are for the things that we do have.
Thank you. That's fantastic to know.
Yeah.
So let's go back a little bit to the definitions and the question from Raj. Raj? Okay, so question from Raj is happiness overrated? Is it more about purpose? And I would also ask Elaine to add to that question. She had a couple questions, follow-up questions to these questions.
Just to add on to that, what is happiness in the first place? And is that something that we should be actively pursuing?
Okay, great. Thank you. So we actually should have started with, that question. So I define happiness as having two components. One is an emotional component and one is more of a kind of cognitive intellectual component. So the emotional component is just the experience of positive emotions, right? So happy people tend to experience positive emotions fairly frequently, and by positive emotions, I mean joy, enthusiasm, tranquility, affection, pride, curiosity, interest. So happy people experience positive emotions more frequently than people who are less happy. Doesn't mean they experience it all the time. Negative emotions are also adaptive. Sometimes when we see injustice, we need to feel angry about it, right? So, but happy people experience more positive emotions. So that's the emotional component of happiness. And then the cognitive or kind of intellectual component of happiness is basically a judgment about our lives. And that is the judgment that our lives are going well, that we're sort of relatively satisfied with our life, that we are progressing towards our life goals. So you really kind of need both of those components to be a truly happy person, the positive emotion, the experience of positive emotions, and sort of this judgment that my life is good, that I'm happy with my life, relatively happy with my life. So that's what happiness is. And in terms of should we pursue it, I mean, I touched on this at the very beginning, that happiness, and I would say, yes, well, if you want to pursue it, I think you can pursue it. Some people don't want to become happier. But what I touched on before is to say that happiness is not something that feels good, right? It's not just about pleasure. It's something that's actually good for us, right? It's good for us and it's good for our families and it's good for our neighborhoods, right? Because happy people are physically healthier, they have better relationships, and they're more productive, more successful in their sort of work or kind of like, things that they're trying to pursue. And so if you're happier, you're going to be more successful, kind of quote, successful in these sort of areas of life. And that's going to affect your family. That's going to affect your friends. It's going to affect your neighbors. It's going to affect your colleagues, right? So if you're more creative, more productive, and more energetic at work, and you're a better negotiator and better leader, that's going to be good for the workplace, right? If you have less pain, if you are less likely to get colds, if you're recover from surgery faster, if you live longer, right? That's going to be certainly a positive for all of the domains in your life. And if you're a happier person, you're going to be better in relationships, right? You're going to have less conflict. You're going to be more positive. You're going to have stronger relationships, both with people close to you and people who are not as close to you. And so it's just kind of a positive. I mean, I'm making it sound like it's like a panacea for everything. It's not. Obviously, there's lots of other important traits that are other than happiness. There are sort of human strengths and virtues that are also important other than happiness. But happiness is associated with all these sort of positive characteristics. And happy people, very importantly, are more likely to help others. So we have this some people have this sort of misconception that happy people are more selfish, right? Because they're happy, they're sort of focused on themselves. But actually, it's actually more sad or depressed people that are more sort of self-absorbed. I mentioned that before. And they don't have the bandwidth so much to help others. But if you're a happy person, it's as though you have the luxury not to just focus on yourself, you can focus on other people.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonja. Well, you explained great what the function, what the happiness is the function of, right? It's a function of positive emotion and judgment about about our life. So let's drill a little bit into the next level of that equation and what is the happiness function of? And Yogesh has an interesting question.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the question is that isn't it a function of expectations, right? I mean, if we have high expectations and we can't meet it, we will be unhappy. And if we lower our expectation and balance it, maybe that's one way to like keep ourselves happy. Is that something that you see the studies show?
Right. So sorry, so I just want to make sure. So your question is about expectations?
Yes, using the expectations and balancing them to improve our happiness.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you so much. Well, when I was talking before about hedonic adaptation, how we sort of tend to adapt or get used to successes or positive changes in our lives, one of the mechanisms, one of the explanations for why we adapt is because our expectations change, right? So so let's say we've all, like when we were students, maybe we lived in kind of an apartment with lots of roommates, maybe it wasn't very nice. Then we kind of maybe got a nicer apartment or a home, and then we adapt to that, right? And so what happens is our expectations rise, right? So now, before, like, I didn't really care that I lived in a really fancy place, but now that I live in a nicer place, now my expectations are higher, right? So, and my aspirations are higher. So now it only will make me happy if the next place I live is going to be sort of just as nice or even nicer, right? So our expectations very, very much matter to our happiness. And something that's really interesting to me is, the World Happiness Report that comes out every year with the happiest countries and the least happy countries. But I'm actually just working right now on the next one is coming out, and I won't tell you that it's all super secret, like what the results are, but for 2022 or 2021, I should say. The Scandinavian countries often come out on top, like Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. And the one question is sort of why. And I read a really interesting article recently that argued that Denmark, because for like many years, Denmark was like the #1 happiest country. The Danish people have lower expectations. And I thought that was so interesting. So again, and by the way, it's not necessarily good to have like too low expectations, right? We want to have high expectations so that we can kind of try to pursue things that are, we want to pursue goals that are a little bit challenging, right? But anyways, it's sort of interesting that that maybe not having high expectations could be one of the keys to happiness.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is interesting because it is really, happiness is very subjective, right? And we measure our own happiness. And Chandan has a very interesting question about own personal biases and the measurement of our own happiness. Chandan.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the question. It's a really nice talk. Yeah, I was wondering, when you answer surveys that try to measure your own happiness, you kind of think about yourself, but there's like this bias comes into picture where you don't know the things that you don't know. So how do you mitigate that, or how do you be more aware of it? Like there was feedback about self-awareness and mindfulness, but again, you're still dealing with your own self, right? So again, those things will still come into picture. So what are other ways to involve other people to help you know more about yourself?
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm just trying to understand the question. So, other ways to learn more about yourself? In
the ways you're measuring your happiness correctly, like how do you make it actionable, where you actually know what to work on, and like, because happiness is internal but also external, right? So
right. Okay, so you're talking about not about measurement, but really about how to become happier and how it might differ for different people.
Yes.
Okay, I got it. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. It really does differ for different people. And one of the themes actually of my book, The How of Happiness, is what I call fit, which is that you have to find the activity or the strategy or the sort of the pursuit that fits your personality, that fits your culture, that fits your strengths and fits your weaknesses and fits your values, fits your goals, right? So it's going to be very different for different people. And actually, one reason I wrote the book is I felt that there were all these other happiness books out there that would kind of tell people, this is what you need to do, right? Do this, right? Or do that. And it kind of like applying to everyone. And so, and I felt like, well, but that it doesn't apply to everyone. I mean, there are certain, I mean, I mentioned the importance of like connection, the importance of gratitude. Like actually gratitude is a good example. I find like counting blessings kind of like hokey and not very meaningful. And so the ways that we might actually use these strategies might fit different people differently, right? So I think that being gratitude in general is a important strategy maybe for everyone, but how we express it, how we practice it might differ for different people. So that's one example. But then it depends on your sort of strengths and weaknesses, right? So for some people, maybe they really need to focus on relationships, and sort of that's, for them, that's really the key to happiness. I mean, again, it's sort of the key for everyone, but for some people, maybe more than others. For other people, maybe their weakness is something else, or maybe they really need to be alone more. You know, I mean, solitude is important too, because it helps you sort of understand who you are and focus on sort of some pursuits that you can't do if you're constantly with other people. Or some people, you know, I talked about the importance of kindness and helping others. We all know some people are too kind, right? They're sort of so giving to others that they neglect like themselves, and they neglect to sort of care about themselves. Now, how do you find this out? In my book, The How of Happiness, I actually have kind of measures, kind of a questionnaire that people can fill out to sort of figure out like what fits them best. But really, you don't even have to do that. You can just kind of think about yourself and think about what are your goals, what are your values, what are your needs, you know, what is your lifestyle like, what is your culture like, and based on those, you can probably sort of make a good guess about what kinds of strategies. Does meditation sound like something that you'd like to practice? Do you think you would enjoy it? Do you think you would find it meaningful? You know, if yes, you know, you try or you work on that more. If not, maybe you should try something else. So yeah, so anyway, I totally agree with you and with the premise of your question. Thank you.
Thank you. We are getting to the end. I have a next question, and we probably will have time for one more. The question comes from Gaurav, and Gaurav's audio doesn't work, so I will ask the questions. It's in another very interesting questions: happiness versus meaningful life. So the question is, can you talk about happiness versus purpose and meaning? Happiness is inward focus, and purpose is outward focus. Is pursuing one better than the other? Mm-hmm. And I would add for myself, is it one and the same?
Mm-hmm. Okay, great question. So there's a lot of debate about sort of the distinction between happiness and meaning and purpose often come together. We can talk about definitions. Purpose is often thought about something that you're looking forward to, right? So like if you have a purpose in life, you might have some kind of major goal that you're sort of looking forward to, whereas meaning doesn't necessarily have to be about looking forward. It could be about looking backward and sort of present and past and future. So meaning, so lots of discussion about like there's sort of a happy life and there's sort of a meaningful life, and sort of what's more important, what should we strive for? And the idea is that happy life is a life that makes us feel happy, feel satisfied with our life, feel positive emotions. And meaningful life is something that, again, it's kind of hard to define, but something leaving a legacy, sort of connecting with others and being engaged in our work, that all sort of has to do with sort of a meaningful life for a lot of people. Faith, religion also often is in that category of having a meaningful life. My answer to that, and this is maybe what Anna was getting to too, is that they almost always go together, right? So it feels good to have meaning, right? Having meaning makes people happy, and having purpose makes people happy. So they're usually pretty highly correlated. They go together, sort of the happy life and a meaningful life. Now, they don't have to. I mean, you can imagine someone sort of leading a happy life where their happiness comes from like extrinsic things, right? It comes from money or fame or beauty. And so that then they don't have meaning, they only have happiness. But I would argue that happiness is going to be short term. So it's not really going to be happiness that lasts very long. So then it's not really a happy life if it doesn't last very long. You can also imagine having meaning but not happiness And the best example of that is Mother Teresa, right? So we actually know now that Mother Teresa was clinically depressed. So she actually was quite unhappy throughout periods of her life, but we know she had a lot of meaning in life. And so that's kind of the example of like, well, there are people who sort of give of themselves so much that they have a lot of meaning, but they actually aren't happy while they're doing it. And I would say that's an exception, you know, because we know from research and from just sort of anecdotal evidence that it feels good to help others, right? To have meaning, that makes us happy. So most people who have meaning are also pretty happy, and actually pursuing meaning is actually one of the ways that you can get happiness, that you can obtain happiness. So that's my answer, that they really go together.
Thank you. Then the last question, it's a question coming from Siraj. Siraj? Okay, so let me go to the question.
Give me 1 second. Let me promote Siraj.
Okay.
He'll be on.
Awesome.
There we go.
Thank you very much, Siraj.
And Siraj, whenever you're ready, you can turn on your microphone and we can hear you. There you go. Oh, click the microphone one more time. There you go.
Cheers, thanks. Yeah, my question really is, how does happiness compare or contrast to being at peace with oneself? So.
Okay. So thank you, Siraj. So it's about being at peace with yourself. Well, it's hard to know. I guess it depends what you mean by that. I have two answers to that question. One is there's two kinds of positive emotions. I mentioned that happiness consists of experiencing positive emotions, and there's two kinds. One is called high arousal positive emotions, and the other is low arousal positive emotions. So high arousal positive emotions are things like joy, enthusiasm. It's kind of like jumping up and down with happiness. And low arousal positive emotions are like tranquility, peace, and calm. And happiness is associated with both kinds of positive emotions. And now there's some cultural differences. Some studies show that, for example, in Asian cultures, people, when they think about sort of the ideal happy emotion, they think more about peace and calm. And in more individualist cultures like the United States and Western Europe, people are more focused on sort of these high arousal emotions. So that's one way to answer that question, is that it's really both, but you might differ, there are cultural differences. And the other answer is when you said being at peace with yourself, I also thought about, well, maybe that just means that you're content with your life, that you're sort of satisfied with your life. So if that's what you mean, then absolutely that is part of happiness, is sort of this idea that like things are good or they're good enough. Maybe being at peace, it just means you accept yourself. So maybe your life is not perfect, maybe you're not perfect, but you kind of accept it. You have self-compassion. And so that absolutely is also associated with happiness. So I guess both of the ways of answering that question would be a yes. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, the time has come. We have to close that interesting discussion. It's really wonderful. I took couple conclusions from that. That first of all, have a purpose in life, lower your expectations, and look forward to be old. Is there anything else, like the last message that you would like to leave us with, Sonja?
I guess, yeah, thank you. I love that. The look forward to be old is my favorite. Yeah, I guess that happiness is under our control, that it is something there are things we can do to become happier if we want to. I'm not saying we should all try to do it, but if you want to, I guess that's what I would leave with it, that happiness is sort of under our control. It might take effort, just like it takes effort to accomplish any important goal in life, but there's something we can do about it. Thank you. Thank you all. That was fun.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sonja. Thank you everyone for participation. It was great. I would like to applaud the entire team.
Thank you.
Yeah.